back once more to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the second story from the 10th Doctor Adventures Volume 3. This time round I'm going to be taking a look at 1 Mile Down, as written by Jenny T Colgan, featuring the return of the Jadoon alongside David Tennant as the 10th Doctor, alongside Catherine Tate as the infamous Donna Noble. Now, of course, previously in this series, I have, of course, already reviewed the first episode from the Volume 3 Adventures, being, of course, No Place, as written by James Goss. So if you haven't checked out that review as of yet, I certainly recommend doing so in order to get my general opinion of this series as a whole so far. And also, you can actually choose to buy this as a whole set, so generally it's good to get an opinion of all 3 stories beforehand, as opposed to maybe just buying them singly. So much like with the previous 10th Doctor Adventures that have came out over the years, there is in fact a number of different versions that you can of course purchase. To start off with, there is the limited edition collector's book, which is of course limited to 5,000 units, and is in fact a rather nice collector's piece, and does of course also come with some bonus additional material, as well as some rather lovely graphic design pieces, including costume designs for the different stories that are featured throughout this volume. The physical edition is priced at £35, and I do believe that the download of this is priced at around £25. However, if you are more interested in buying the episodes singularly, then you can also get some standard CD case versions, which are priced at £10.99 for the physical version, and of course also £8.99 for the download version. Of course, as per usual, there's all of the other details available on the Big Finish website, including casting information, product details, as well as your extra story synopsis. And you can also take a look at the trailer that is available on the Big Finish website, Big Finish YouTube channel, and the official Doctor Who YouTube channel. So now all of that is out of the way, taking a look at the actual episode itself, being 1 Mile Down, as written by Jenny T Colgan. This episode, I like to think, is kind of your standard Doctor Who story for this release. It is the most normal to new series Doctor Who when compared to the other 2 stories in this release, being The Creeping Death and No Place. I think that this episode is generally a lot of science fiction fun, and I think that the way that Jenny has in fact written this story is very much inspired by the 10th Doctor era of the show. It is incredibly snappy, incredibly fast-paced, and the characters also have quite a lot of personality as well. There's a lot of characters that you can in fact have the opportunity to like, but also at the same time, equally, a lot of characters that you can of course hate due to their different opinions and personalities. Some of them, to say the least, have very vibrant and colourful opinions that certainly are not too acceptable within today's society. Taking a look at the production credits for this story, once again, much like the previous story, No Place, the sound design and music for this episode has been created by Howard Carter, and once again he has done a really good job for this release. I think that as a whole the music isn't necessarily too impressive, or at least to me it wasn't too standout. However, I do think that the actual sound design for this story was very good. Of course, the majority, if not all of this episode, is pretty much focused within an underwater city, and I think that the sound design does very much benefit that. It does feel like that you are underwater with all the different characters, and the sound design is very much inspired by an underwater city. It does feel almost very cloudy in its design, if that is a rather unusual way of describing it, but it does very much feel like you are submerged underwater, which is of course very cool. The script editor is Matt Fitton, the producer is David Richardson, the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery, and the director is Ken Bentley, and of course the cover art has been created by Tom Webster. So much like with the previous review, starting off with the Doctor himself, as of course played by David Tennant. Once again, it is lovely to see the audio adventure with David Tennant in. It is almost a standard thing by this point. It is just something that you come to expect. I think this is now his 8th audio adventure on Big Finish, which is just brilliant. I really love that. Of course, in this story, I think that his character actually had quite a lot of nice moments, I must admit. Not necessarily the most comedic version of the 10th Doctor, which I think certainly worked in this story benefit, but this time round we in fact had a more serious version of the 10th Doctor when he comes face to face with some rather not very nice personalities, some people that believe certain things, and he is somebody of which that believes completely against their ideals and what they think is right, and for that reason we have quite a lot of shouty 10 throughout this story and quite a lot of argumentative 10, and generally I want to put things right 10, which I think is something that is nice to see. story. We've not particularly seen too much of that so far throughout the previous 10th Doctor adventures in both Volume 1 and Volume 2 with Catherine Tate as well as Billie Piper, so I do want to see more of that in the future. I think that it would be lovely for Big Finish to maybe tackle that darker side of 10, maybe even bring in the Time Lord Victorious from the end of his era. That would be brilliant as well, because I think that David Tennant certainly has a lot of potential to be a very dark character. It has been proven in other media that he can of course be a very good and strong villain, therefore he certainly has potential to do so within Doctor Who. So I think that generally for this release, it wasn't the most quirky version of the 10th Doctor, but a bit more serious and a bit more strict, so I quite like that. I think that Jenny certainly wrote him quite well. Catherine Tate as Donna Noble, on the other hand, didn't really have too much to do throughout this story. I certainly seen her more as just your standard companion. She was in fact separated from the Doctor throughout the majority of this story, which did let her meet a few more characters that the 10th Doctor didn't really get to see too much of throughout the episode's duration. However, I think the fact that she was alone and independent as well was a nice touch, although I didn't really see too many moments from her to shine. But that said, in the previous story, we did of course have no place with both Sylvia Noble and Wilfred Mott, therefore that story was much more focused around her character, and I have already listened to The Creeping Death. I think there will be no spoiler to say that she does also have some very nice standout moments in that story as well. So I'm kind of okay for this story to almost settle her onto the back, because we had a few more serious topics to deal with in this story, and generally a few more characters to meet as well. And speaking of those characters, let's take a look at those in a little bit more detail. So to start off with, we have Andrea, as played by Raki Ayola, and she is basically the main figurehead of a company or group called the Intergalactic Trust, who are basically the equivalent of a council or the National Trust on Earth, who want to preserve and maintain national parks, essentially, which is a main theme of this story. However, they are a lot more money hungry and a lot more business driven, and generally a lot more unfair to the population that we do of course meet throughout this story. And I think that it would certainly be a compliment to say that Raki basically portrays his character to be absolutely unlikable. It's brilliant. I really was gritting my teeth every time she came into the scene, simply because she is so shallow as a character. Disregard for the colony on this planet and the species actually live where she's currently making a business out of. We also have Nicholas Briggs in this story, of course playing all of the different types of Jadoon. I will speak about those a little bit more in a bit, but we do have the Jadoon captain, we have Claw, the junior Jadoon, and of course your standard Jadoon soldiers. Next up we have Elena Crooks, who does play Patricia Derbyshire, who is a lovely character throughout this story as well. We did get to see a lot of her. She basically has a relationship with one of the fish people in this story, or as they more appropriately call them, the Finns, because the fish term is almost seen as a little bit of a racial slur. Also have Pickus, as played by Christopher Naylor, and Robert Whitelock, who's playing Garth, as well as Tippus, who are two other fish characters in this story. In fact, Garth is in fact not a fish person. He's very much not a part of those people. He absolutely despises them. He's basically somebody who is a humanoid from another planet, another Earth colony, and basically he is essentially an extremist who believes that they are supreme, and basically they are better than everybody else, and the fish people are just these aliens who slack at work, don't do anything, are rude, not nice, smell a bit, and yeah, he's just generally an overall really lovely, likeable character. And honestly, every single moment, once again, throughout this story, where he is in it, you just feel, ugh, just get out. Robert Whitelock does a very good job in this story of actually creating, once again, a very dislikable human who basically I was glad to see the back of at the very end of this story, to say the least. So now moving on to the actual narrative itself. It is a very interesting one. It's something of which where, as I said earlier, it is a standard Doctor Who science fiction adventure. However, it does have a little bit more underlying themes in there. The whole idea of this story, in simple terms, if it was to relate it almost to Earth and the way that we have things in current society today, I like to think of it as a business very much coming in, believing that they are doing good, or believing that they're going to generate profit by basically destroying these absolutely wonderful, lovely places places that were previously untouched by anybody, and basically they are ripping apart a colony's livelihood, essentially, where they live, their villages and their schools, and they are turning it into a financial engine to generate profit. And in order to do this, they basically put a globe around the underwater city, meaning that there is no longer any water in the underground underwater city, and the fish people who did originally inhabit this underwater city now need to wear the equivalent of diving equipment that basically gives them water in order to carry out their functions within this city that they would normally do. So it's essentially like an alien race coming to Earth and turning the Earth into a tourist attraction. However, we need to have bubbles around our heads to basically pump in oxygen and whatever else we need to survive. So it's very awful. That Jenny has wrote this story very well to keep it light-hearted, but also have a lot of underlying Earth themes in there as well. Of course, the underwater city itself is something of which that normal Earth people wouldn't really understand, and we have some lovely things I imagine that you would marvel at if we could see it in real life. Visually pleasing, we have chapels, we have monasteries, we have shells that glisten in kind of the flickering of the light coming from the sea. It would all be lovely and beautiful, and throughout this story we in fact start to see the devastation of what is the globe that is currently shielding the entirety of the city essentially start to crack, and we have this whole idea of this beautiful marvel being destroyed by the water simply pouring in on top of it. And it did in fact remind me very much of the recent issues that have happened with Notre Dame, of course, where we had the ceiling of the Notre Dame catch fire. We still, I don't think, know why, but there was of course some works going on at that time. But everybody in France at that point who was in the local area was just stood marvelling at essentially this beautiful building going up in smoke and in flames, and all that history and all that beauty burning with it. And there was very much the theme of that within this story, I kind of felt, which was lovely, although at the same time it wouldn't have been based on that, because of course Notre Dame was only, I think, 2 months ago, maybe 3 months at a push. So upon editing the 1 Mile Down review, it turns out that the original footage in fact had a little bit of a technical audio issue, meaning that I've needed to stand in and basically record literally these next few minutes again just to complete the video, making sure that I've covered all the different points that I wanted to. So in the original piece of footage I was in fact about to talk about Vallarasee as an actual planet. As I have previously mentioned, of course I was very impressed by the actual place that we visited within the story itself. I was really impressed with the way that Jenny T Colgan actually managed to world build throughout this story, because there is a lot going on within only 1 hour, and I feel like we got used to the actual civilians from Vallarasee, as well as the actual city itself and all the different landmarks and what they have built over the presumably thousands of years that they've occupied this city. And of course also at the same time we did have the involvement of the Jadoon, these rather large thuggish creatures. And I think that it is a really nice juxtaposition to have these really delicate fish people, or the Finns as they are referred to, and then we have the Jadoon storming in, essentially this massive thuggish race that don't really have any care for delicate artefacts whatsoever, and that is really nicely presented throughout this story, and I do certainly think that it did work rather well. Of course, especially with the Finns, we did have a relationship going on with the character called Patricia that does almost become a companion kind of for this story, and she is a human that has basically befriended one of the Finns, and they are in almost a relationship. It's kind of in the early stages, and she wants to go and live with him, meaning that we do have almost that change alteration period of her trying to understand their customs, and that was a really nice involvement within this story as well. Certainly you got to know her as a character. She almost became a little bit of a companion of Donna, which is a rather nice touch, and also it helped with the understanding of the Finns as an actual species. And what I did particularly like is at the very beginning you do have this idea of the Trust basically being the antagonist, the villain of the piece. However, once you start to uncover certain aspects of the plot, it turns out that there may in fact be a little bit more extremism, not just on the side of the actual Trust, but also from the side of the Finns. And normally you go into this story kind of presuming that the Doctor and Donna are in the good and they are walking into this situation, and you have an innocent party and essentially an aggressor, a bad party. However, it turns out that really more than one bad party, or at least people with different opinions and beliefs, have decided to take it literally to an extreme in order to get their city back to how it used to be. Of course, in this story, you do also have the involvement of a junior Judoon, also known as Chloe, who is basically an infant, and he is basically on a trial period in order to become a police officer, which is a really lovely comedic part of the story itself. He does have quite an important role as well, which is a really nice little touch, but he is nice. Nothing really too over the top. He was just kind of a light-hearted character, nothing too serious about him. However, it was quite nice to have some different oppositions between the older Judoon and then you have this younger Judoon almost doing everything wrong. And on that note, I will in fact go back to previous recording Ben to, I do believe, talk about the amount of Judoon within the actual story itself. And because of the lack of the involvement of the Judoon in this story, it did make me feel a little bit underwhelmed because I was expecting a little bit more from them, and I think that there is a dangerous thing, especially with audio dramas. Unlike the actual TV show, other than paying for your TV licence, you are not necessarily paying for Doctor Who, unless you are kind of waiting for the box set to come out and then you are going to actually watch it, which I think hardly anybody actually does that. But I do kind of think that with Big Finish, when you put something on the cover, because you do need to pay full money for it without being able to experience the story as a whole, you do kind of lead that very dangerous territory of almost misleading. I don't think that this story does mislead, don't get me wrong, but I just think it would have been lovely to maybe have a bit more involvement of the Judoon in this story. And to be quite honest, I think I might just be a little bit bitter, simply because I think the previous involvement of the Judoon was the phenomenal Classic Doctor's New Monsters story, Judoon in Chains, which was a story that was basically completely related to one Judoon, and it was very unique, and it was a great character piece based around one Judoon learning certain aspects, and the Doctor was actually teaching them aspects of human life, which I thought was wonderful and brilliant. And I think that that story was simply so unique in the way that it was done, and something of which that I wouldn't expect from the Judoon as a monster, let alone with the Sixth Doctor. And then you kind of have this story where the Judoon do essentially turn back into their normal role. So I think in a way, come to think of it, it does make sense that in this story they don't really have too much to do, because at the end of the day they are just law enforcements. And I think that if you are to involve the Judoon on a full level, it is quite hard to not have that force and actually them trying to incorporate the law into things and kind of controlling different species. So I just think that maybe a few more scenes would have done. Maybe not necessarily involvement within the actual plot, but just maybe a danger to actual life that was beyond the scale of that planet or something like that, that brought the Judoon in because they've seen a threat, and maybe they wanted to arrest people for more serious crimes. Maybe something like that might have just involved them a bit more. And because I wanted to see more 10th Doctor and Judoon, I won't lie, like face to face, sort of Bosco, Fojo, whatever else they like to say, but hey, I still thought it was a good story, even though the Judoon weren't really too present. And of course, naturally, due to the Judoon coming in to kind of enforce the law, that does mean that there is a little bit of law terms in this story, which, being a law student, I was very happy to see that naturally. There was in fact a bit about contracts and terms within contracts, which got my lawyer heart very, very happy indeed. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. It was very much appreciated. So yeah, bonus points for the law terms, because we love a good law term, or at least I do, speaking as probably one of the only Doctor Who fan / lawyer fans on the planet. That's that for 1 Mile Down, as written by Jenny T Colgan. Overall for this story, I think that this is very much a good new series tale. It is very much inspired by the fast-paced style of new series Doctor Who, and for that reason, I think that if you are a new series listener for Big Finish, then this story is certainly for you. It is very easy to follow. You get to see lots of characters along the way with lots of different personalities, meaning that it is very hard to get confused between the different characters. Also, it does have quite a nice amount of underlying themes in there as well as a lot of relatable moments that you can in fact relate to Earth and the current things going on within society today. Overall, however, compared to that of the previous story that had no place and the upcoming review of The Creeping Death, I do think the other two stories just have something about them that make them a bit more superior in my own personal opinion. I think that The Creeping Death appeals to me for reasons that I will get onto in that review, and No Place is just generally a really enjoyable one, simply because it's a bit more unique, involves Wolf and Sylvia. And this story I kind of feel is the shorter straw of the box set, but it's still an enjoyable one nevertheless. Thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about this release, then please do leave them in the comments section below, and I will reply to them at some point in the near future. And do of course stay tuned for more Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama reviews coming in the next few weeks, along with my final review from the 10th Doctor Adventures Volume 3 series, as I'll be taking a look at The Creeping Death as written by Roy Gill. I guess I'll see you all in that review soon. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.